Awesome. Thank you guys for hanging out and waiting. We had a little bit of just a little glitch. We couldn't get the email to go through for whatever reason, but we had to try 3 or 4 different ways, and we accomplished our goal. So appreciate everybody for hanging out there, and welcome to another episode of Monday Night Live on the 10 Horse Money YouTube channel, and
with new internet.
Yeah. We've been kind of revamping a bunch of stuff. I had a bunch of internet problems, and I hardwired a Ethernet cable directly to this computer, and everything is looking pretty good. So
we got full construction in the background here, so
I'm excited about tonight. So on the other end we're in Cape Girardeau, Missouri.
Cape Girardeau, okay, that's right.
Yeah, it's well, you've probably been there before, right on the Mississippi River, just a little south of St. Louis.
Yep, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Are you on actually on Table Rock?
I live in Springfield, which is about, well, depending upon what part of the lake here, I can get down there in probably 35 minutes or so from my house. So, and then about the same distance from Stockton Lake, too, a little bit further.
Okay.
But Table Rock's the main one I fish a lot.
So did you grow up in Joplin or?
Yeah, I grew up in Joplin, and then I lived up north of Joplin, between Joplin and Lamar, for about 20 years up there. But I lived in Joplin from the time I was born till I was in my mid-20s, and then moved up there north of Lamar. I had a farm outside of town there, and I moved back to Springfield here about 6 years ago after I met my wife here. She's from here, so I've been in Springfield like the last 6 years or so.
Okay, but man, I almost moved to Springfield.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool town. I like Joplin a little bit better, but it's getting used to it here a little bit.
So were you still in Joplin when that tornado came through, the big tornado?
Yeah, I was. I was actually coming back from an FLW tournament. I was about 5 minutes from town when it went through. So rolled into town like it just happened like minutes before. So it was like, it's the most surreal experience you can ever imagine, man. I've never seen if you guys have seen pictures of it, it doesn't even do it justice to what it was really like. It's crazy. Literally, it's like a mile wide lawnmower, and set it right down in the middle of town and went through town with it. That's what it was. I mean, it went smack dab through the middle of town. I can't believe there weren't thousands of people killed. I mean, I can't believe there was only 200 people killed in it. I don't see how people survived the thing.
I was working at State Farm at the time, and the rep that I worked for, one of his good friends was an agent in Joplin, and he had the option when he was first starting his agency to either go to Joplin or to Cape, and he chose Cape for family situation. But we were talking to him on a conference call, the agent that's out there, and he said he had trouble. He's lived in the town most of his life, and he had trouble getting around because your normal landmarks aren't there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That you go to the corner and there's Joe's shop, but Joe's shop doesn't exist anymore, and you don't know to turn right on that street.
I bet that's very confusing.
Oh man, it was heartbreaking for sure, man.
We had we're about 2 hours away from Kentucky Lake, and I fished a BFL there I guess it was about a week ago, and I drove down real early in the morning, and I could kind of see some of the damage, but on the way back after the tournament, I drove through, and you could see it's unbelievable. You can just tell looking in the woods, you can tell something looks different. Yeah. And as you get closer, it's because there's like half the treetops are gone. It's like hollowed out in there, and they're all laying down inside the woods. It's sad. It's
there
really
in Mayfield that you're talking about there?
Yeah, going through
the Mayfield tornado. Yeah.
We've been fairly blessed here in Cape. There seems to be a bubble, and I think the river affects that a lot.
Ozark Mountains too, I think, somehow.
It just kind of, when storms get to us, they either go north or south of us, and that's unfortunate for our neighbors to the north and the south. But knock on wood, we've been fairly blessed by not getting smashed.
Yeah, that's a good deal.
So
I've had enough of it. They've had three tornadoes in Joplin that have killed people over since I've been there, from the 70s until that one last one. So hopefully there won't be any more coming through there.
You had one down there that hit Cumberland City, I think, not too terribly long ago.
Yeah, I think there was a little one that came through down there. It just did some minor damage. I don't think it was any big deal, but it was did recently.
Well, you guys didn't know this,
think.
Go ahead, Randy.
Well, I think Tornado Alley sort of moved a little bit. It sort of moved up in this part of the country, from where it was down in Oklahoma, North Texas. Seems like there's a lot more around here, especially like south of Joplin, down through there.
Yeah, well, that kind of makes sense, like weather seems to shift a little bit here and there. But you guys didn't know this, but we had Randy on here just to talk tornadoes for 2 hours. We're gonna do like an in-depth tornado meteorologist live stream thing. Yeah, no, that's not what's going on. We're gonna dive into some good fishing.
Well, heck, as fishermen, we have to be a little bit of.
We're out in the weather, man.
We have to be meteorologists, right? I mean, it's
like one of the most important apps on your phone is the weather app.
Exactly. Whichever one you use, and I got 3 of them on mine. And this time of the year, it's always you check it and see which one's the warmest, and then you just go with that.
Yeah,
it makes you feel better when you leave the house.
And they're never right though.
No,
I mean,
that's true.
Anything more than like 2 days out, it seems like it's 50-50.
It's like the best job in the world, right? You can be right about 10% of the time.
Yeah. I was the way they do that, like if they predict like a 30% chance of rain, I think there's a 30% chance that it will rain somewhere within so many miles,
30 miles,
30 miles or something. They got a lot of leeway in the prediction.
Mm-hmm.
So, guys, if you got some questions, there's a bunch of questions on here. Start loading them up, and we'll start going through some questions. So I just kind of want to start with the fishing adventure. How did you get into fishing? Was there a mentor, or like a family member that got you into it, or did you just get curious and start doing it on your own?
Into tournament fishing or just fishing?
Well, fishing and then into tournament fishing. Yeah, start from way back.
Well, my dad and his best friend, they used to fish quite a bit, when I was real little, and they started taking me with them back when I was about 7 or 8 years old. We didn't go that much, 3 or 4 times a year, and never did really catch that much, but I just loved every second of being on the water. And then there was a little creek down at the bottom of my mom and dad's house, and I would go down there after school and I waded it all. And that's really where I learned and where I caught some of my first fish at, is just wading that little creek. And then when I started getting to school, we started sneaking into farm ponds and catching bigger fish, in farm ponds. And that really got me into it, and started reading Bassmaster magazine at the same time. And it just was one of those things. I just loved it. I mean, it's like it just sort of came natural to me. And as the years progressed, I got more and more involved in following the tournaments in Bassmaster. And this was back when guys like, Roland Martin and, Clun were at the top of their game back in the 70s, Jack Haynes, Tom Mann, the old Tom Mann, and really old school dudes, Bill Dance, those type of guys. And there was something about watching those guys on the tournament circuit. It just like, man, that's what I want to do. I mean, that would be awesome to be able to do that. And just sort of started out slow like that, joined a bass club when I was in high school, started fishing small buddy tournaments, in the early 80s. And in 1984, that was my first year. I fished the old Redman circuit, which is now the BFLs. And I qualified for the All-American that first year I fished it in 1984 down at Lake Toho in Florida, that was like a completely different world, going like a tournament and sort of a nationally known event, fishing for $100,000. And during that whole time, I was wanting to fish the Bassmaster. So I've been saving up for a couple of years, try to get enough money to pay for the entries, which were only $600 back then per tournament. And there was only 6 tournaments. So after I qualified for that All-American in 1984, I started fishing Bassmaster the following fall, in the fall of 1985, and qualified for the Bassmasters Classic my first year. That's what kept me in it. And it's sort of like been a whirlwind since then, man. That's sort of how it happened, though, in a nutshell.
I didn't realize how good of a tournament fisherman Bill Dance was. I can't remember his stats, but he was like his first 5 or 6 years of tournament fishing. He was the man. Well, you forget about those guys. I just think of them as a handful of dudes.
Yeah, he was, but there was, you had guys like Roland Martin and Dance and a handful of guys that they were the only ones that did it all the time, full time. Everybody else, you couldn't make a living at it back then. But those guys would pre-practice and they just became unbeatable pretty much. Him and Roland in the 70s, they just went back and forth between winning Angler of the Year. But man, it was a different time back then. It was just like the energy of the entire thing was completely different than it is right now. Sort of a lot more innocent, simple time.
Well, so in 1985, you make your trip to Toho, and you're from the Ozarks. Had you ever seen a piece of grass in the water before? Submergent vegetation?
No, I hadn't. I had no clue what I was doing down there. This was back before there was no research you could do on the lake. I mean, there wasn't internet, there wasn't, nothing. I mean, so I got down there and the only thing that I knew about it was just in Florida. I looked at it, I didn't have anything. So we had one day to practice there in the tournament. That's when they provided boats. So Ranger had boats and that type of stuff. So I launched that first day on Toho and just started running down the lake. I had no clue how even to fish grass at all. So I started noticing back then there was a bunch of telephone poles that were scattered in the lake for running power lines. And I picked up a shad wrap and I started, that's the only wood that was in the lake. And I started fishing around these telephone poles and I started ripping them. I mean, it was like, 3 to 4 pounders almost on every pole. And as it wound up the first day of that tournament, I lost like 3 giant fish. I can't remember what I caught. I had 3 that weighed 9 pounds, but I lost a bunch of big ones on the thing and could have done really good in the tournament if I had just got them in. But I sort of ran out of telephone poles. There wasn't that many of them in the lake. Yeah, that was an eye-opening experience for sure. But like I said, that was a different time. Like you simply could not access or get information. I mean, there was just no way to it. I had no way to even find a magazine that had anything on Lake Toho with it. And, Shaw Grigsby won that tournament because he lives right there. So he knew the place better than anybody. So I remember after he won the tournament, they were talking about all these techniques like punching mats and stuff like that. And it's like, what the heck's punching a mat? All the Florida terms I'd never heard of. But so it took me about 5 years after that before I could really get good at catching them in Florida. It was a pretty steep learning curve back then for it.
It's hard to stack 3/8 ounce weights up deep enough to punch a mat. So
yeah,
exactly. I can't remember what I had in that tournament as far as the weight, but obviously he was punching with monofilament. I didn't think he used it back in '84 like that. So but yeah, I think the only thing I knew about was I knew Clun had won the Classic down there in '77, and he caught him like a snagless Sally or some type of old deal like that, or Johnson's minnow or something. So that was about the extent of my knowledge on it. But anyway, that tournament, I mean, it just, when you're from Missouri and have fished nothing but little buddy tournaments, and you get thrust into a deal like that where you're going to a banquet at night and getting, fishing for $100,000, it's just sort of like, if you love bass fishing like I did, it was sort of like a drug, that you just wanted more of it,
So you had paper maps probably most likely back then. So how did you pre-fish for those early tournaments versus, more modern times where you do have like a GPS, you have an actual map on your boat if you want to use it? What were some different, how'd you manage to do that?
The way that we did it back then, again, the information highway was narrow. There was just no information. And the way that I did it is like once Bass came out with their schedule, I would try to call around the tackle store on the lake, and I'd order a topographical map, and I just study the map. I mean, I just sort of see how the lake was laid out, and that's really the only pre-tournament practice that I did. I never pre-practiced any of the tournaments. I mean, as you fish longer, you develop sort of more of an information network, and you meet people, and you form some type of a network to get some information prior to a tournament, at least additional information. But back when you first started out, you were sort of on your own, and sometimes that's an advantage, because I went to a lot of these tournaments, like that first Bassmaster tournament I won at Bugs Island in 1989. I didn't know anything about the place, and the place I wound up winning the tournament, I found on the map that I'd order from a tackle store just because it looked like something I'd fished back in Missouri. So sometimes not knowing much about the lake, was an advantage, to a large degree. See, not all the time, but sometimes it was. But it was like,
yeah, we don't
think a
know
lot
how
of
good
guys.
we got it.
Yeah. Oh, they don't, because imagine this. Like, this is what this is what it was like back then. You didn't have any cell phone, so it's like once you left home, you had to stop at a payphone to call anywhere. I mean, you didn't. You had a road atlas that you found everywhere. So just finding your way around the logistical challenges of just getting to the lake and finding a boat ramp and finding where you're staying was extremely difficult, because not only you had to have a road atlas, you had to have a state road atlas in order to find the dang launch ramps where you're putting it at. And like I said, not having any type of access, to your family or friends or anything like that. It sucked. It really did. Back then we didn't think much about it because that's just the way it was. But you look now how easy you have it, how much information is at your fingertips. I mean, literally, you can, like right now, I don't care where you want to fish or how you want to fish. You can just spend 5 seconds and Google and find more information on it than it took me a decade to learn on my own. It's just, the learning curve is just in a different universe now. It's just unbelievable, the difference. I don't think that's one of the things I don't think a lot of people understand back in the late 70s and early 80s when I got started out, is there was no information even in magazines, because back then the fishing magazines that you had, they rarely interviewed pro fishermen. They had a lot of the outdoor writers back then, 50 years ago, they thought they were better than the pro fishermen. So they would never put professional fishermen in their articles. They would just write the articles about how they thought you needed to be fishing. So you had a very limited window of any type of technique information. And the only way that you could really learn back then was to get in the boat with a good fisherman. And I got real fortunate. One of the best fishermen here in the Ozarks sort of, took me under his wing when I was young, taught me a lot of stuff about, bass fishing, catching big fish. And it really speeded my process up. But if you didn't have that, man, it was tough.
Yeah, I used to use the Gazette, or like you'd buy it was a map of a certain state that was kind of a lot more detailed than like a Rand McNally map. And it wasn't that long ago that we had, they used to have the little Garmin GPS units that you would stick on your windshield, like before everybody had this. Yeah, the TomTom, before everybody had a cell phone. I mean, I remember that. And I remember just, you had to actually talk to somebody and write down directions, take a right on highway, whatever, and then take a left on Bluebird Lane. And you had to write it down.
Yeah.
Well,
or you wouldn't know how to get there.
When you got that message from, or got those directions from that person, you just hope that they weren't some attendant at a gas station that says, go down this street and turn at old man McNally's house and then go down a couple blocks, and then there's that white church there on the right hand side of the road.
You got to throw a red barn in there too.
Yeah, the red barn and old man's place burnt down a couple years ago. It's like, what? Because I've ran into that out there where GPS and I hate to say this, but it failed me. I didn't have an option to go down that path of the GPS because it took me in the middle of a cornfield and said, "You have arrived." I'm like, I'm not here.
Yeah.
Corn.
Yeah, and then you put it being dark on top of that, where you said you need to turn on such and such road, and you can't see it till you get up on it. But the evolution on that, I'll tell you a little bit about the evolution. The lake maps back then used to be terrible. It's like they'd have like 25-foot contours on them. I mean, there was no detail whatsoever. So the first high-tech innovation that came about was the U.S. Geographical Survey maps. So a lot of us figured out that you could order these from Washington, D.C. So back in the late 80s, myself and Gary Klein and Clun and all these guys, Denny Brower, we were ordering these geographical survey maps that gave you good contours on it. I mean, it gave you something similar to a modern day GPS, but still at the same time, you had to have a compass on your boat. You had to know how to triangulate, and you had to navigate by compass. And there's very few people to do that. I remember Danny Cree and myself, we ran all the way out to Stony Island in Lake Ontario with the compass and a map on our lap and triangulating through compass how to get out there where you couldn't see land anywhere. People just don't do that anymore. That's just like a thing of the past. And then when the first GPSs came out, that was a big deal. But when the first GPSs came out, Gary Klein and I were the first two that I knew that had them. And they looked like a little tiny cell phone, and there was no outline of the lake on it. All it was like a grid, and it showed where you were going on the grid. It's like you would be, say, for example, you were on Table Rock Lake. It didn't show that you were on Table Rock Lake. It just showed like a grid where you were. So the only good it was basically to mark a waypoint offshore. So we would take these things, we'd duct tape them to our leg as we were running down the lake, and then you could punch in your GPS locations once you found an offshore spot. And that completely changed the game, because, you know, you get on these big grass flats and some of the offshore lakes, and you'd find fish out there that you could never before get back to unless you dropped over like a buoy or something. So there was a lot of stuff that people just have no clue how it went through, you know, back in the day there.
That's crazy. I remember pre-GPS when I got my first boat on Kentucky Lake, I was scared to go very far just because you don't know if you're going to be able to find your way back. You get 4, 5, 6 coves down, and say you run 10 miles and you're coming back and it's close to dark and you're not real familiar with that lake. You can easily keep going in the wrong cove and just have to spend the night on the bank, you know? So I was always scared to go too far.
The first boat, every year when I got a boat, I mean, when I got a new boat every year, the first thing I would do was order the best compass I could find, because a compass was invaluable. And so I'd order these super expensive gimbal mount compasses, and you needed them. I mean, if you were fishing offshore or doing anything off the bank, you had to have them. Not just offshore, but if you're just in some lakes. I mean, can you imagine running, like, you guys ever been on a lake like Lake Hartwell or someplace that has got 6,000 little pockets and everything looks the same? It's easy to get turned around even in the daytime on a lake. So just knowing how to read a compass was a big deal. It's sort of a lost art. Not many people know how to do it anymore. And that's why David Fritz was so dominating back in the 90s, because he was a master of triangulation and he could do it before anyone else figured out and knew how to do it. So that's what basically killed a lot of David. Not that he's a great fisherman now, but that's what, when he was at the top of his game, that was pre-GPS, before everybody else had that ability.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I still kind of halfway triangulate a little bit if I can. I mean, you got your waypoint, but I still like to see.
Like to have a reference point.
I like to have a reference, just to kind of, so I don't drift too far, so I can get that, get a decent cast on something. Like if you're trying to find a brush pile off of a waypoint, it's a little bit tricky. There's a couple jerkbait questions that kind of popped up, and that's one of the topics that I wanted to dive into. So I'll just throw this one up there. South Jersey says, Randy, when do you like to use the Megabass high float 110 and in what situations?
The high float, I don't even think they make that bait anymore. That was the one that was around for a while, but really the only time that I ever used the high float was if I was fishing over some type of shallow grass, specifically like shallow milfoil, hydrilla, Florida, TVA lakes, where I needed to keep that bait high. So I would basically not let my rod get below, like, parallel to the water. And, you could allow that bait to float up and as fast or as slow as you wanted to, depending upon how you wanted to weight it. But it was very situational. There wasn't a lot of applications that most people consider jerk baits for that lure.
On that high float, were you able to go ahead?
Go ahead. Well, most of the time, a bass has to be in a really, really specific mood and personality to hit a high floating jerk bait. It's just like there's a small window of time when those fish will hit it. It's a good technique for smallmouth. Smallmouth probably react to it better than any other species.
Were you able to throw that like a floating rogue where you could run it on the top? Like a wake bait?
Well, it didn't. The high float was not as buoyant as like a rogue or a Rapala. It had a slower float to it. So it wasn't really the same thing. The situation where you use the rogue or the Rapala was completely different with the high float. Like I said, for me, the high float was if you had submergent grass that was like 3 to 4 from the surface, and you had water temperatures that were over 70 degrees, and water visibility that was between, say, 2 to 4 foot. That's sort of like the situation I'd look for. I hadn't, aside from that situation, that hadn't been that productive for me.
Well, I caught my first topwater fish yesterday behind the house, and I was throwing a floating rogue, and so I consider that a topwater fish because it was I was jerking it down and it was sitting, and then doing the traditional way where you kind of let the rings dissipate, and then they roll up on it. But I caught 4 or 5 bass yesterday on topwater, so I was happy. That's
interesting you said that, because I just filmed my YouTube video for tomorrow on that very topic. I was talking about rogues and Rapalas like that. It's interesting you brought that up.
Yeah, I always forget about that. Every year I'm like, I'm going to break out my Rapalas and my floating rogues and start fishing them, because I've had some really good.
I think we're a couple weeks like at the lake.
A couple weeks away.
I think we're a couple weeks away from that.
It's early, but a farm pond. This pond back here is only like 4 acres, so it warms up a little bit faster. And I just wanted to see if I could get a bite, just to see if I could get a bite on top.
Yeah. That's kind of like that what you were talking about, Randy, with that high float. That's a very situational bite. You got to have conditions just ideal for that.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see that video tomorrow. So
yeah, that's one of my favorite techniques, and you get the really small window when that works too. I've had some really good tournaments doing that though in the past.
Oh, if they're spawning, they don't like something sitting above their bed. It's like a popar or any kind of floating bait. They drive some nuts sometimes.
Popar is typically my go-to, but like a P70.
Stephanie says, how dirty of water can you run a jerkbait in, including the bright colors?
Well, the dirtiest water I've ever caught jerkbait fish in a tournament was at Lake Pickwick, and about 6 inches of visibility in the middle of the summer, which was really oddball. I was actually catching them shallow crank and a square bill, and I had this one spot where I was making repeated casts to, and I was trying to just give them everything in the boat, change up different techniques to try to maximize it. And I just had a jerkbait in the rod locker, and I put it on shad pattern, 6 inch visibility, caught 2 5-pounders on it. So I know they'll hit it at 6 inches of visibility. But most of the time I want to have a minimum of like 12 to 15 inches of visibility. I mean, I've caught a lot of jerkbait fish in 12 to 15 inches of visibility, but not as many as if you have 3 foot plus, for sure. Cause it is a sight bait. It doesn't push a lot of water. It doesn't draw fish a long distance away because it doesn't have the vibration quality, strike generating characteristics of the bait that does that. But if you get it close to them, they're going to bite it. I mean, even in muddy water. And the colors, like I said, obviously you need to use some type of a flat finish or a brighter color as the water is dirtier. So normally I'm going with some type of a pearlescent or chartreuse side if that water visibility is under 12 inches.
I like this. This is a mega bass right here, but this Western clown color has been a pretty good color around here when the water's kind of dirty. Got that white belly, with the chrome and then the yellow. That's a pretty good color around here in the stained water.
Yeah, that was one of the top rotors back in that particular color too. Doesn't get fished a whole lot anymore.
Yeah, I just started throwing it the last couple of years.
It gets a lot of use over here.
Yeah, they'll bite it. They'll bite it in a wide range of colors, conditions. Yeah.
There's something about grass in that clown color for some reason over here.
Yeah, I think flash. Sometimes a little flash and stain, a little bit of flash. Not just something bold, but something with some flash too is a good way to go at times.
Yeah, you
So
get a combination of not just water clarity, but sunlight penetration, wind, all that type of stuff, time of day.
just wanted to announce there's a lot of new faces on here. We do a giveaway, and sometime during the stream, we're going to make a reference to Sasquatch. So when you hear that reference, guess a number between 1 and 200. And Randy has already picked the number. I've got it written down right here. And whoever guesses that number is going to win a prize package. So keep your ears peeled for that magic word. And we got another, let's see. Actually, you know what? I was wanting to bring something up before I forget about this. I don't know if you guys saw this or not, but I was watching, it was on Facebook. It was posted on Facebook. It had about 80,000 views. So I'm sure a lot of people have probably seen this, and I reposted it on my channel, but I hadn't seen it. There was a tournament fisherman, and I don't know if it was, BPT or if it was the elites or what tournament it was, but they were back in this canal. So there's a guy on the boat, and I believe there's a cameraman in the back. And they're in this canal, so it might have been Harris Chain because there's been a couple tournaments there, and it's got a lot of canals down there. And he catches a fish. He's reeling it in, and it's like a 14, 15-inch fish. He swings it in. He grabs it. It's moving around, and he's getting ready to – he's taking the bait out of its mouth or something. And then all of a sudden from the starboard side of the boat comes a bird. I don't know if it was like a hawk or if it was an owl, and it comes right in between the camera guy and the angler, and it goes right up and grabs the fish. Rips the fish out of the guy's hands and starts to fly off with the fish, and it ran out of line. The fish was still hooked. So when the line got tight, the fish got ripped out of the bird's talons and it fell down in the water. And then the angler went ahead and reeled it in, and they're just kind of both standing there like, what in the world just happened?
Wow.
And I was like, first thing was like the precision of that hawk or owl or whatever it was to come in and focus solely on that little fish and ignore everything else that was going on and grab that was amazing. And then it was like there was no fear of humans or of a boat or anything. It just it was just so focused on that fish that it didn't care what else was around him, and it just went in. But did you see that?
I didn't. I thought you were going somewhere else with that. I saw another video today of somebody getting hollered at in the back of a cove. So
it was crazy. It was interesting.
Yeah, I saw that clip that you're talking about. That was,
you saw it?
That was wild.
Yeah. I don't know if it was an owl or a hawk. Could you tell?
I think it was a hawk. I mean, I'm not sure. It happens. I just saw the short clip of the video. I didn't see it over and over again, but I think it was a hawk.
I mean, that would freak me out. Have you ever had any you ever had any crazy things like that happen out on the water or outdoors?
Man, not like that. I can't think of anything I really had like that. I've caught some alligators before, not trying to catch them. I was with Roland Martin one time. We drew each other out at a tournament at the Harris Chain, and we were fishing around this cypress, like this backwater cypress area, and he threw the spinnerbait. We were both in the front of the boat, and he threw the spinnerbait by the cypress tree. And I'm talking the water boiled on this thing. And Roland's just like he is on TV. He goes, son, I got a big one. This is a big one. I mean, this bull was huge. And this thing starts stripping drag out to the middle of the lake. We get it out there, and he's hooked about a 12, not 12, it was about an 8-foot alligator. And he was all excited. He wanted to get it in. He got it up the boat, and it finally broke his line. But that was the only time anything like that happened.
That's crazy.
I don't know if I'd want an 8-foot alligator in my boat.
No, it wouldn't go in the boat.
You'd be surprised how quick that thing wore out. It made one big run, and then it sort of just came to the boat. It didn't fight like you would think one would. It wore out pretty quick. I mean, he probably had 20-pound line on it and got it to the boat before it broke. Just cut the line on his teeth.
Right.
Huh. I've had herrings, like you get the blue herring come after your spook or something, and you're trying to get it away from them.
I had a buddy catch a loon on a jerkbait.
Oh, it
dove down and ate his jerkbait.
I believe it. Those loons are aggressive.
He fought it for a little bit, and the only reason he knew it was loon, he never got it in. But he came back with a loon feather on his jerkbait. So,
oh man,
yep, they're down there eating fish.
Yeah.
Here's a question from Oliver, and he says, Randy, how would you mentally prepare for a tournament that are consistently won with forward-facing sonar and certain techniques, knowing that you're not going to use it or it's not your fishing style?
Well, the main thing is you got to realize there's always more than one population of fish to go after in a lake. I mean, you've at any one time there's always at least a dozen different patterns working on any specific lake. Take for example, you know, Table Rock where I fish all the time. I mean, everybody down there is addicted to live scope, and you'll go out on the lake and every day everybody's just looking down at their electronics in the middle of the coves trying to catch schooled up, spot bass. But you can run up the rivers, up the Kings River, up Long Creek, up James River, and you can put square bill. And if conditions are right, you can beat those people that are live scoping out there. So one of the things you have to do is you have to sort of identify the options that you have on your lake, because every lake out there has got sides looking for live scope water. And the best thing that I would recommend in that is you need to fish the shallow cover and the extremities you're fishing. Try to identify what type of shallow cover options are there. Try to get into an area that's got a little bit more off-colored water in the lake, and fish for shallow fish, target them, because there's a population of bass in the lake that, unless the water temperature gets down below 40 degrees, they live in the water. A lot of times they're good fish if you can really figure out how to catch them and get them to fire based upon the day and the technique. So that's why guys like John Cox dominate so well, because they don't even spend time looking for those type of fish. They look for shallow fish all year long, and it may not be the best pattern, but it always exists. And one of the things that I remember a lot is back, in the early 90s when Tommy Biffle was at the top of his game. Him and Denny Brower and myself, we always wound up in the same area. And because we always went to the extremities, we'd always go as far as we could up the creeks, as far as we could up the rivers. And even on tournaments where nobody could catch him up the river like that, Biffle would always do good because he would commit to it. Instead of going up there and trying it for 2 or 3 hours and not getting a bite, he would go up there and say, I'm not fishing anywhere else but here. And he'd figure out the subtleties and the nuance of that area and make it work when nobody else could. So you just sort of have to make a commitment to something other than live scope.
Well, okay, so that brings me to another question. So when you're fishing an area, how long do you stay in the area and continue to use the same technique if you're not getting feedback? There's kind of two trains of thought, I think. If you're trying to catch fish a certain way, will you bail on that area and just keep running different areas of the lake until you run into those fish? Or if you're in a good area and you think you should be catching them, you think there's fish there, but they're not biting that technique, will you go through it with something else? Or, what's your thought process on that?
Well, a lot of it is you have to make a determination. There's always two major decisions to be made in a tournament situation. It's like, do you change technique or you change area? So you have to make that determination. Say, for example, if I feel they're set up to be caught on a jerkbait, and I roll into a couple areas that I really think look good, but I'm not getting any bites on that. So at that time, I have to make the determination: are these fish not set up, or they're not in the mood or positioned right to catch them on a jerkbait, or do I need to make an area change? So if everything in my frame of reference points to the fact that these fish should be eating a jerkbait, the first thing I do is make a change in area to get a little bit different geographical angle of the banks, or a change in the water clarity. So let's say, for example, if I start out and I fish a couple of creeks on the lower end of the lake and don't need any good, I may pack things up, run 25 miles down the lake to try to get in the mid part of the lake or the middle part of the lake. And I get into a couple major creek arms and I try the same technique there. And if I exhaust a couple areas that make me realize that the fish simply do not want to bite a jerkbait, that's when I do a technique change within that area. Sometimes it's a combination of both. Sometimes it's a matter of, you've got to make a technique change and an area change both. And that's why in bass fishing, it's like the guys that do good, they look like geniuses for doing good. And these guys you see finishing next to the bottom of the pack, they look like they're clueless. And there's a fine line between finishing at the bottom of the pack and finishing in the top 10. Tiny, tiny fine line. It's a matter of one decision here, one decision there, timing, pulling in at the right spot at the right time, and capitalizing on that. So that's why bass fishing is the toughest sport on the planet. It is. Too many uncontrolled variables.
I mean, that's a perfect example of what happened to Jason Christie at Santee Cooper. Came off the highest of highs, and
the next tournament
he blanked the second day of the tournament. Caught a 4-pounder the first day and blanked the second day.
Yep.
Not saying that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That there wasn't other variables involved with that, but I mean, at the end of the day, you just won the Bassmasters Classic. He's a power fisherman, shallow water angler. They went to a shallow water fishery, and
yep, your timing can be off just a little bit. You can be just I mean, how many times have you fished a tournament? And we fish a lot of Wednesday night tournaments. They're little 4-hour tournaments, and there's guys that'll say, I pulled up on this point. We're on the way back to check-in 15 minutes before the tournament, and I caught 2 5-pounders, and they win the tournament right there because they pulled up.
Yeah,
when they were biting.
There could have been 20 people had already fished that point, but in that given like 10, 15 minutes, those fish had pulled up there, and they were feeding, and they pulled up at the right time and caught them. So that happens all the time. It's such a timing thing.
Well, let me explain how something like that can happen to Jason. I don't know the situation, how he was fishing, but I can tell you how that happens to one of the best in the world. Let's say, for example, and I'll just put a hypothetical out there. Let's say Jason, in practice, he was flipping cypress trees at Santee Cooper, and say he 5-pound bag flipping the jig on cypress trees and getting a lot of bites, that type of stuff, and really feels that the area he found has enough fish to win the tournament. So you have the first morning of the tournament, and you fish and you fish and you fill hours and you have a bite. And then you start changing up baits. You maybe go to a creature bait or a tube or whatever. So now it's 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning, and you still don't have a fish in the boat, but you know there's big ones here because you just caught them the day before. So at that point, you have to make a decision. Okay, I know these fish are here. Do I keep staying with them? It's a matter of timing, or it's a matter if I just need to get the right weight or the right presentation. Maybe they want to move and bait, and you do everything you can to try to figure out how to catch those fish. And all of a sudden it's 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and you have a fish. Then you make a decision. Okay, do I bail out? So you bail out and you start running around looking for new water, and you don't catch any fish. You zeroed the day. Then the next day you're in a position where you got to catch a mega bag just to get in. Put yourself in a pretty high reward situation. You may go out and throw a big swim bait all day trying to catch a mega bag, and you catch one, or you don't catch any. That's how you finish last tournament, even if you're a top angler. It's a very, very, delicate balance there, man. It can happen to anybody. Believe me, I've done it many times like that.
Well, like you said, I mean, it's one of the hardest sports in the world, and it's also the most humbling. You go from the highest to high to the lowest to lows in less than a week's time. So,
yeah, I mean, you'll see people that fish the same lake.
Yeah, people don't realize how in this sport the tiniest of things they make or break careers. Really, they do. I mean, if you look at guys that are marquee anglers, like Van Dams and your Brian Thrifts and all that type of stuff, and you take a fish here, a fish there, a fish here away from the bag that they had, and then they go from winning a tournament to finishing in 25th place or something, or even below. So I'll give you guys a prime example of how tournament. This is how it works. We were fishing a Bassmaster Invitational at Truman Lake. It's been 20 some years ago, and going into the last day of the tournament, I was leading the tournament, and Rick Clun was in second place. So to make a long story short, Clun wins up winning the tournament, and I finished second. And I got talking to him that after the tournament, he said the thing that won it for him, where I'd have won the tournament, is right at the end of he hooks a 7-pounder on a square bill crankbait. He didn't know how big it was, and the fish came up by the boat, and he thought it was just a 2 or 3 pounder, and he starts to swing it over the side, and he's halfway out of the water, and it's a 7 pounder hooked with 1 barb on the back hook. He keeps it coming over, and he said the bait comes out of the fish's mouth, it hits the gunnel of his boat and starts flopping like that and flops into the boat. So if that fish flops it one more time and flops out of the boat, I win the tournament. And it flops the right way and Clun wins the tournament. That stuff happens. Now, what is it? Is it some karmic reward or punishment, or what, or just a chance chaotic event the universe has? You don't know. But there are countless stories out there like that people don't realize. And then then people place judgment on, anglers' careers over the year based on something like that. So it's like, it's really bizarre.
It's like a coin. That was a coin toss moment. It was like it's a coin toss fish. I mean, you could went one way or the other. And
well,
go ahead. I was just going to say, like, piggybacking off what you just said, people don't hear about a lot of times about the fish that got off or the fish that broke off. You don't see that on the tournament standings. You don't see all those little things that happen. Maybe you got the bites, you just didn't get the hook in them, or they were biting a little bit funny. They come off, or there's so many things that almost happen. And one guy, everything goes his way, the other guy goes the other way, and it's crazy.
And we're talking about seasoned pros here. Look at how many regional guys or local guys that in your all's hometown, in our hometown, that could be the next KVD, the next Jason Christie, Jacob Wheeler. They could be any of those guys, but they don't have the stones to play, or they just don't have the desire to go out and run a professional trail. There's so many locals that are just absolute hammers that we never hear about, that will never get their shot or never have the desire to have their shot.
But could they actually go out and do that? Because there's a lot of stress that comes along with being on the road.
True.
I mean, it's one thing to be at your house with your family in your job and go out on the weekends and just kick butt and maybe adventure out a little bit further. But it's another completely different thing to be away from your family for months at a time.
Right.
And try to focus on fishing and put all the other stuff out of your head. So
I remember when I was a kid, I ran into Mark Menendez at Dunn's in Paducah.
Mm-hmm.
And I was probably 10 or 11 years old. And we got to talking about tournament fishing. And he's like, well, don't get married and expect to spend 330 days a year on the road. I was like,
you can be a tournament fisherman.
At 10 or 11 years old, you're like, that's a great idea.
Right.
So,
yeah. I have no doubt that the best fishermen are not professional fishermen out there. I mean, I'll use an example. The guy I talked about that taught me so much about fishing, his name's Terry Thomas. You guys may have heard of him.
I have heard of him.
He's an Ozark dude's won everything around Table Rock Lake, and I've fished with all the top guys. I fished with Clun a bunch. I fished with Hank Parker, Roland Martin. I fished with all of them. Larry Nixon. Aaron Martin is a good friend of mine. We spent many days in the boat together. I have never been in a boat with somebody as good as Terry Thomas is. Most people don't know who he is, but he was just like you said. He did not want to travel. He wanted to be with his family. He wanted to fish around here. You'll never know who he was. So the best anglers out there are not the ones you see that are willing to do what it takes to get it done, because it's a hard life. Man, I've done it for 35 years. It is a hard, stressful life. People come up to me all the time on the road and say, "Oh, it must be nice to be a pro fisherman." I'm just like, dude, you got no idea how much work it is, how much stress it is, how much uncertainty revolves around it. It is not for everybody. It's a tough way to make a living if you do it professionally. I mean, there's nothing easy about it. I fisherman because I know what it's like. I know how hard it is.
Here's a question. Let's just throw this one out there and see what it brings. Recently, the big winter bass that were on the bank have disappeared and been replaced by spawning small males. Wondering if Randy knows where the big ones have moved to.
Well, what can I have a little on that? Where you at? What part of the country? What lakes you talking about?
Well, that happens
If I could get
a little bit around here. So in Southern Illinois, let's just say Southern Illinois, we have a lot of smaller lakes. They're probably anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 acre lakes, and they have grass. And a lot of times that grass will hold the fish up shallow in the wintertime. So it is common to catch fish even, in high 30-degree water in 5 foot of water. And I've kind of noticed this a little bit too. The water's really stained right now over here, and you will catch a lot of smaller fish right now that are up. That seems like some of the bigger fish, I don't know that they've moved. Maybe they've just gotten stingy on certain days because and if you hit it right, it's lights out. But if you don't, it can be really tough. And then there's a lot more smaller fish that are starting to move up, kind of scouting around. So it seems like when the bigger fish aren't biting, you're still catching, a small bass here and there. So maybe I'm kind of assuming that that's what they're talking about, because, or we can go with that scenario.
Well, I'll answer that in a generic sense. I'll answer it. It's like when you're talking about big winter bass, most of the time you're going to be talking about the pre-spawners, in some stage like that. And the early pre-spawn is the best time to catch big ones, because that's when those big ones are positioned to be caught. They're hungry, they're feeding, they're in that zone to be caught. That's why you catch a lot of big ones in the late winter and early pre-spawn on A-rig, spinnerbaits, jigs, crankbaits, that type of stuff. What happens, what's happened to what he's talking about, that all he's seeing males is responding, is those big fish are spawning deeper than you think they are. A big fish very seldom will spawn shallow. I mean, you can see one occasionally, depending upon how thick the cover is, but most of those bigger fish will spawn out of sight or barely in sight, where you can just barely see a fin of them if it's just perfect conditions. So more than likely, spawning what he's thinking they are.
So let's say on a lake like Bull Shoals or even Table Rock, if you are catching, bigger fish up shallow in the winter, and then all of a sudden your big fish are gone, and it's a lot of small ones. You're saying most likely that those are just the males that are moving up there, kind of scouting around, looking for, places to put their beds and set up shop.
If you go down to Bull Shoals, the top prime spawning coves on the lake, you'll see a ton of small spotted bass and largemouth bed visible. I mean, they'll be all over the place. And once in a while, you'll see a good one. But most of the time, those good ones, like I said, they're pretty much out of sight or just barely in sight. These guys that catch the big bedding fish on the impoundment type lakes, and I'm not talking about the grass lakes or the Florida lakes. I'm talking about on man-made impoundments. What they consider sight fishing is not sight fishing. Like when you saw Drew Cook win that Sandy Cooper tournament, that's not sight fishing like an impoundment is. Sandy Cooper is not it's not a typical impoundment. It's more like a Florida lake. But when you're on an impoundment, the guys that are catching these bedding fish, they're down there looking in 10, 12 foot of water, depending upon the water visibility. And like I said, they're just looking for a movement here, maybe just a slight movement. They're never looking for a whole fish. Big fish, most of the time, will bed so deep you cannot see their whole outline. You're just seeing a movement. And it's got to be just the right conditions to do that for the most part. Now, there are exceptions to the rule, but I think the majority of the bass over 5 pounds bed pretty much out of sight, even in off-colored water.
So we're sitting on top of them most of the time.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of those, personally, I think those big ones spawn weeks before we were ever even looking at them. They're already done, gone, and
there's some that slid up, I think, over this weekend.
I agree 100%.
There's some 7-pounders caught with bloody tails at some of these local lakes, even though the water's 54 degrees.
I've seen it many times at Table Rock. I mean, like I said, I fished Table Rock for years, and like you'll go in a spawning bank and you'll see 13, 14-inch fish all over the visible beds on the bank, and then on a crystal clear, bright day where there's no wind whatsoever, your boat will be in 8 to 15 foot of water, and you'll be able to see some big ones down there, but you can't even see that it's a bed. And if there's the slightest little ripple, I mean the slightest little ripple, or the sunlight is the wrong angle, you can't see it at all. But if it's super perfect, just a bare part of the fish, and those are where those big ones bed at.
Jeez, I need to have my daughter.
They're practically impossible to catch visually.
My daughter needs to be on the front of the boat. She's 13. She's got eyes of a hawk. I mean, I'm not seeing those fish. That's a young person's eyes to pick up on those fish.
Hey, Brian's got a question here. What's your favorite spark shad size?
It depends on the situation. I like them all, but my favorite one, if I can get them to bite the thing, is the 5-inch. I mean, I've caught more good ones on that 5-inch than anything out there. Just on a, just an offset hook with this like an 1/8 ounce belly weight on it. Reeling it shallow over the top of shallow grass, or just along the bank shallow, just about 3 to 4 inches under the surface. That's my favorite way to catch them. And then I also like the 3-inch one on that Okashira screw lock head. That screw lock head with that 3-inch spark shad is a bait that they will bite. Very few people fish it. You'll see a few people fish it, but when you get into areas that have like water visibility of 2 to 3 feet, you try that thing around boat docks, on corners of docks. Those good ones will come out and slam that thing. But like I said, that 5-inch spark shad is my favorite when they bite it.
Is that the one that's got the little prop on the front of it, the jig head?
The Okashira screw head does. It's got the little prop on it.
Yeah. Okay. I don't have any of those. Those looked really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Can you? How does that thing track? Is there a lot of resistance with that little blade, or does it feel just like you're swimming a regular swim bait?
It's very finicky. You have got to get the thing on. I'm talking absolutely perfectly straight and perfectly flat. It runs on its side, and also you can't put a lot of pressure against the blade, or the blade won't turn. So it's very, very finicky to get the thing to run perfect. But once you do, I mean, it's a fish catching dude.
Like 6-pound test, 8-pound test? What are you throwing it on?
Usually 6 to 8, depending upon how deep I'm fishing it. I mean, I like to fish that thing shallow. I don't fish it like over deep water. I'm usually throwing it like on a windy point, shallow, or around some type of docks or cover, that type of deal.
Okay. So what's a couple good colors of a spark shad if somebody was wanting to try some out?
The one that I use 90% of the time is called Real. I found that they will bite that color in about any situations you can find. I mean, it's a really good color. That's the one I use most all the time. If the water's really dirty and off colored, I'll use that albino one. Sort of like the translucent pearl looking they have. But that real color is a fish catching color, and everywhere I went.
Yeah, that is a good looking color. I'm on Tackle Warehouse right now. Sorry.
Yeah, we should have pulled it up on here.
We should have.
I don't know if you can still do that or not.
I probably can.
I fished that little, what's it called? That Hasdang or Hasdong shad. It's like a
Hasdong shad. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that little bait. It's a good little drop shot bait.
That thing's awesome on that. It's a great bait on a drop shot, or again on that Okashira jig head. It's really good, but it's it'll definitely catch a lot of spotted bass on that thing for sure.
Yeah, it looks super realistic. Jay Beffa says Vision 110 has been the most popular for the Midwest. All the new models are overwhelming. Is there other models we should look at?
Yeah, one I would highly suggest is that 110 Junior +1. That I have caught so many fish on that bait this past year. That thing, I in cold weather months, it's pretty much replaced all my wins. I catch more fish on it and just as big a fish on it as the 110. It's basically, it looks just like a 110, but it's about I'm gonna guess probably quarter of the size smaller. It's about an inch or so smaller, and the profile smaller. Gets down into that 7 to, or depending upon how heavy test line you have on it. But it's been my best bait this winter, and all the on the water lessons I did, like Table Rock and Bull Shoals and Lake Stockton.
It must be really good because they're almost sold out on Tackle Warehouse.
Yeah.
Yep, that's a good bait.
Every
Yeah.
one of them,
The
every
one-
color I clicked on was out of stock.
The 110 Junior is a good bait too, but you just can't get the depth out of it. I mean, if those fish are down to like 4 foot, you can catch them on it, but it's more situational than that 110 plus 1 Junior.
I don't think people.
I try to stay away from the 110 profile if I can, just simply because it gets fish so much. I mean, that's why I use like the old 110 Magnum a lot. The Ito Shiner is a real good one. All this type of stuff.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to say I love a finesse type jerkbait just for the same reason you mentioned, that it doesn't get fished as much, and I catch plenty of good fish on.
I like that.
On a finesse
Is it
jerkbait.
the 78 XP?
78. That's a
TD. I'm sorry.
TD.
The X80. I'm sorry. The trick darter. I really like that one.
X80 is good. So is the X Nanahan plus 1.
Well,
that's a good bait.
We'll show some of those baits. Oh, you're doing it right now.
Yeah, I got to figure out how to do it. Hang on a second.
So what are some of your, let's say somebody was going to go out and buy like 5 colors of jerk baits to cover, I mean, I don't want to say every situation, but a majority of the situations. What would those 5 colors be, and what situations would you fish them in?
That's a question. I could take me a long time to answer that question. There, first of all, Megabass makes like they make like 150 colors. So there's a lot of colors out there that I don't even know exist. You know, there a lot of them are subtle differences. So I think one of the most important things you need to remember about color is, instead of going after a specific color pattern, you have to identify 3 different types of jerk baits based upon their finishes. And the finish would be the GG finish, or the GP finish, which is like a translucent, or the PM finish, which is a flat finish. So when you're talking about getting your best colors, think of them in those terms like that. So the first one I'd suggest is like for cloudy water conditions, you know, or cloudy conditions, rainy conditions, all that type of stuff, maybe a little bit off colored water, is go to a table rock shad. Table rock shad or a French pearl orange belly is going to be really good in any type of overcast, rainy type conditions. It's one of my favorite. That the next one on there is if you have sunny days that have some wind, or partly cloudy days. That would be the next weather situation. You need some type of a metallic finish. And a couple of my favorite, those are the GG Gill, which is like a bluegill pattern. It's got like a metallic finish. And then the Megabass King Kuro, which is a gold with an orange belly. Those seem to work really good on if you got wind or you know, bright days, but just windy conditions, that metallic works better. And then finally, if you've got clear water, not much wind, variety of different sky-like conditions, if you've got overall tough fishing conditions, the Pro Blue 2 and the Tennessee Skeleton Tennessee are my 2 favorite. I probably caught more bass on the Skeleton Tennessee than any color Megabass makes. That's just a really biggest fish I've ever caught on a jerkbait came on that color, and I catch a ton of fish on it.
It's good breakdown. Jerkbait is pretty technical.
Well, you did pretty good with that. That wasn't 3 hours long of the jerkbait lesson. But
yeah, short.
I like that. That was
there's a
highlights.
lot of subtleties to it, because here's the thing about color on jerkbait. It's like it's affected by so many different, very not just affected by water clarity. It's affected by water temperature, sunlight angle, the light intensity, the wind, a lot of the personality of the fish, the species of the fish, and a lot of that stuff, there's interacting correlations between them. So the color on a jerkbait, that's why jerkbait fishing is the most difficult technique to master, is because it's a sight bait, and there's 2 things that trigger bass to bite a jerkbait. That's how you retrieve the bait and the color. And sometimes one is more important. Sometimes both are important. Sometimes you got to hit them both right. And that's why on any given day, you'll have 100 guys in the tournament on jerkbaits, and there'll be 5 guys catch them on it, and everybody else is saying they're not biting it. They just don't have the right combination of color and down, and also color changes as the day goes on, because the sunlight intensity of the water, how the sunlight enters the water, changes throughout the day. And when that changes, that also changes the color that the bass will react to. So very seldom do you pick up the same color at 8 in the morning is going to work at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because you have different sunlight intensities.
Okay, so let's take a situation. Let's take a blue water temps are, let's just say, low 40s. Bluebird skies, you got 3 foot of visibility. Now, in the morning versus the midday, what are like 2 color changes? Like, say, I don't know, when the sun gets above the trees, you're going to make a switch to a color. So you got the water temperatures like in the low 40s, 3 foot of stain, 4 foot of stain, something like that. High sun, so you're going to get some good sun penetration in the water.
3-4 foot visibility.
3-4 foot visibility.
You said stain.
Oh, stain.
Yep.
3-4 foot visibility. High sunshine. So what would you, if you start out with one color, just give like a scenario of a color change that you would go through in that situation?
Well, depending upon how dark the sky was in the morning, I would definitely start out probably with some type of a flat finish that had some glow to it. And again, that would be something like the Table Rock Shatter. They make one called the Secret Grape, is also good like that. And have a flat finish early in the day, that glow will get you more bites right off the bat. And as that sun gets up and the sun starts hitting the water, say at 10 o'clock in the morning, 10:30 in the morning, that's when I would move, more to the a little bit more subtle color. And the subtlety color would depend upon, again, how much wind that you have, how much sunlight penetration, the level of clouds that, the cloud, the sunlight penetration varies a lot with the intensity of the cloud, whether you have like the big cumulus clouds or the cirrus clouds, how bright the sky is between the clouds, how much haze is in the air, all that type of stuff. So normally, unless it's windy and raining, I'll go to some type of more subtle color as it gets up in the day, and a little bit brighter color early. And normally another thing about that is the biggest fish will always hit the brightest color. I mean, that's why if I can get away with some type of a loud color, I usually always start out with that, because if there's a big aggressive fish that's ready to bite, they will bite that loud color before anything else a lot of times. That's why fire tiger is one of my favorite colors that don't get fished much. I catch a lot of fish on the fire tiger, but there's a very small window that they'll bite a fire tiger. But when they do, you can't beat it.
Did you say a fire tiger jerkbait or a crankbait or both?
Yeah, Megabass. It's called a matte tiger, the one Megabass has.
Okay.
And now they just sold out.
On that. Yeah.
That's interesting. I've thrown that red jerkbait around a couple times. Like 2 years ago, Lake of the Ozarks, it was real stained, and my buddy Mike had ordered some of these. I don't know, it was a Japanese special import color or something, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was ugly. It was like red and orange, and they bit it.
I can't keep up with the colors. I mean, all those JDM colors and the colors nobody can. I mean, who can go out there and have 150 different colors of jerkbaits in their box? I mean, at some point you have to simplify it to some point, but it's hard not to, because some of those, they look so good, some of those new colors they come out with, but some of the colors that have been my favorites, they don't make anymore, and they'll run them for like a year or two, then quit making them. And that's just sort of the way they've always ran it there a little bit. It's been successful for them.
Here's a question. Randy, what water column do you typically cover first? Top to bottom or bottom to top?
That completely depends on the water clarity and the water temperature. I mean, and obviously the lake, how the lake's set up on that. Normally what I try to do is, in my fishing, the first thing I try to do is I try to identify some type of a pitching or flipping bite. So that's bottom to top, looking like that. I'm always looking for a way to catch them pitching and fishing, flipping, pitching shallow cover. That's my primary thing. But if the situation's right, say for example, it's early post spawn, you got clear water, you got some cloudy conditions, that's when I'm going to start top to bottom. I'm going to start with the top water. I'm going to start with a big swim bait and that upper water column, depending upon that set of conditions. So all that stuff is just relative to water temperature, sky intensity, water clarity, combination of those three factors make that decision.
Some love on there from Bass Fever. Bunch of shout outs. Everybody appreciates the content. So they're saying thanks for doing what you do.
Oliver's come up with some good questions tonight.
Yeah, Randy, when approaching a tournament on a tough pressured fishery, do you base your day on catching a quick limit with smaller fish or grind it out all day for a few bites?
I never, ever, ever try to catch a quick limit of fish. I'm always trying to catch good ones from right off the bat. In my opinion, if you go out with the approach that you're going to try to catch a limit and then go for big ones, you're wasting your day, because most of the time you're going to want to get rid of those fish anyway. So all the tournaments that I've ever done good in, finished in the top 10, I'm fishing for good ones as soon as I put that trolling motor down in the morning, and I don't take it up until at the end of the day. I don't go by the philosophy of getting a quick limit and then settling down. To me, it never works out. Normally I keep that small limit in the boat and maybe catch one upgrade. And to me, it's just sort of a waste of time to try to catch a quick limit. Unless the quick limit they're good fish. I mean, if you're on a spot that's got some good ones, you can catch five 3-pounders real quick, then go do something. That'd be different. But I'm not going to go weenie worm around trying to catch 12 inchers before I go out and flip that jig all day and try to catch a good one.
We'll address the jig here in a little bit, but Bass Fishing Fool's got a question. Who's the flag behind you?
That is one of my best friends, Sergeant Major Rodney Schmolak. He was won the Silver Star in Vietnam. He had 3 tours with the Army Rangers there, and Rodney and I, he fished with me for like 7 or 8 years as a co-angler, and we sort of became best friends. And he passed away a few years ago, and gave me a Silver Star before he passed away.
That's awesome.
That is really cool. That is really cool.
Any veterans out there, thank you for your service. We appreciate everything that you've done for us. So, speaking of your jig, what is your go-to color in your new old? That's really old. Your new old school Blaukat jig.
Old school. Yeah, that was one of the questions I wanted to get into that jig and some of the colors and stuff.
The two more than anything else are the black pencil and the solid brown. Those are the two most versatile colors that'll work in a lot of different conditions. But the 8 colors that we designed I designed them specifically to match situations that I use them in, based upon time of year and water clarity, that type of, especially like in chartreuses and the brown and oranges and that type of stuff. And also that brown, blue, and orange one too has got a real you can't go wrong with that. If you got water visibility of less than 2 foot, that black with blue tinsel, and if the water is greater than 2 foot, the solid brown, and just mix up your trailer with that. The tinsels are real key. I mean, the person that got me fishing the tinsel was Tommy Biffle. I mean, him and I were both sponsored by Lunker Lure for years, and they tied us up, hand tied these special black with blue tinsel rubber jigs. And they just catch, in my opinion, they catch so many more fish than the black jig with the blue rubber secondary color on there. So that's sort of why I brought that one back.
So talk about the development of that jig, the ideal behind it, and how it all came to be.
Well, like I said, jigs has been one of my favorite baits ever since I've been fishing. I mean, that's almost every tournament I've won, has been on a jig, flipping a jig. My Bassmaster wins were on a jig. I won 3 Central Pro-Am tournaments around this part of the country on a jig, some regional stuff on it. So I've got a lot of experience with that. And I used Lunker Lure for years, which is a good jig, but there were things I wanted to do with it to create my own jig that I never had a chance to do. So when I finally got hooked up with Baitworks here in Springfield, Missouri, they had the resources and the facility to basically design any jig that I wanted to. You know, they had the molds, they could make molds, they did all their own stuff. And I was always after a jig that had, I wanted a certain head design that would allow it to come through both rock and wood really well. And the Lunker Lure jig, it was okay, but it didn't come through that stuff as well as I liked. So I designed the head specifically to come through rock and wood good. And I wanted a short shank jig, because a short shank jig, it gives you the option to create a big profile or a small profile with the same jig. And I think you get better hookups with it. So this particular jig, we got a pretty short shank on it compared to a traditional jig. And the main thing is the custom hand, lots of length on it and lots of material, because the reason we tie it with that's long, the jig skirts are long, is that allows you to trim it to meet your needs. If you want to hang a pork frog off it, you've got the length to do that. If you want to trim it back and thread up a rage craw, you can do it. And make sure you got just the right amount of rubber in it. And that's what takes so long. I mean, that's why these jigs are so expensive, is like the people that we have tying them, it is tedious to do. I mean, you can't sit down and tie these things for 8 hours and do it. It burns you out. So they're so tedious to tie that it's hard to get people that are in the position to spend the time tying them with that. So that's sort of the way it evolves a little bit. We're working on right now. I'm designing a finesse jig for them, where it's going to be called the preschool jig. It's going to be along the same lines, but just a smaller version. We're pretty excited about that.
So is this the
preschool jig?
I like that. Is this the micro jig that they're talking about in the comments?
Well, it's not really micro jig. It's sort of like it's the jig that I'm designing right now. It's like it's a combination. You could pitch it on 17-pound line, or you could cast it on 12-pound line. It's sort of like set up where you could cast it to rocky bluffs and catch fish on it. As far as the hook design and diameter, it's going to have a nano coated hook, which is, I don't know any jigs I don't think there's any finesse jigs that have a nano coat in it. And then you can also, like I said, pitch docks, pitch laydowns with it. So it's going to be pretty cool. We're in the development stages right now. It's probably going to be ready in September, I'm guessing. It'll take 6 to 9 months to get the hook back after you get the final prototype in.
Wow.
The nano cut is.
Is it going to have a finesse cut to it?
The head's going to be the exact same thing. It'll look just like the old school jig, but in a smaller profile, smaller design with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, when you say hand tied skirts, are those wire tied or are they thread tied?
Wire.
Okay.
Yeah, they're wire tied.
What size hook is on the old school jig?
All 3 sizes have a 4/0 on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of times one of the big mistakes I think manufacturers make with jigs, and a lot of people do, is they use too big of a hook in it. Because if you have too big of a hook, I mean, especially if you flip with braided line, which a lot of guys do, is you tear that fish's mouth out, and you've got too much diameter to get good penetration. I have found in my own experience that you hook more bass that you land if you go a little small on the hook, and also you get more bites because it's not as obtrusive as a big hook. So the 4/0 hook, this jig is a good match. The diameter, I really spent a lot of time getting the wire diameter and the bite gap just right to get it where it maximizes that combination of the hooking and the getting the bites on it.
Yeah, I think I like a smaller hook too for the most part. I think it pins them a little bit better for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can go too big on the hook. Really do.
I think a lot of times what folks forget is, you take a big football jig and you throw it in 20, 25 foot of water at the end of a long cast, and you got this heavy gauge, heavy wire hook. That's a lot to penetrate through a bass's mouth at 30 or 40 yards.
Right, with your line stretch. And
if you got a thin wire hook, it's like poking a needle through your skin versus poking a pin through your skin.
Yeah,
so
you can just lean into them pretty much.
Exactly.
It's the same deal with pitching and flipping hooks. I mean, I catch a lot more bass downsizing even my punching hooks. I mean, that's why a lot of those top Florida guys down there, all these dudes that live in Florida that punch mats all the time. You can't believe how small a hook some of those guys use. They use, now it's the stiff hook, but it's a small diameter. There's just something about it. It just gets the fish better.
Mm-hmm. What about, let's see, here's a question. What's your thoughts on scent? Do you always use a scent on your baits?
Yep. I use, if I'm pitching and flipping or fishing slow, I use scent most all the time, usually Bang garlic. I buy it just like everybody else does. I don't get it free yet, but I found that works pretty good. But I like it. I use it a lot. I don't think it hurts. I think it could actually help at times also.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in scent. I think anything that's moving slow, scent helps for sure. I mean, and you could say that anything that the fish grabs, the scent's going to help them hold on to it. But typically, when you're fishing something slow, I think it just makes total sense to have the scent.
I mean, that was evident last year in let's just say the flatworms.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yep,
flatworms, anything.
There's a lot of plastics that, you got the coffee scent and then the Strike King stuff. There's a reason for that stuff. Randy, what is your favorite spinnerbait to use? Mega bass and non-JDM or any old school discontinued ones that you like and still use?
Yeah, we're actually designing an old school spinnerbait now that's going to come out too. But the two spinnerbaits I use now is if I'm burning a spinnerbait, fishing clear water, that Mega Bass SDE is unbelievable. I mean, that thing is a fish catching dude. I'm not saying that just because I'm with Mega Bass, but if you look at that bait, there's something about that thing that just catches them. I've caught so many fish on it the last 2 years. It's Finesse spinnerbait. It's got a natural trailer built into the skirt, runs completely straight as a dime. So if I'm fishing a spinnerbait fast, it's that. But the other spinnerbaits I fish, small or big. That's why I'll usually use like the ripping spinnerbait, like the SV3, or I'm using a 3/4 ounce or 1 ounce spinnerbait. I don't hardly ever use a 3/8 or ½ ounce spinnerbait. It's either big or small for me. And the big spinnerbaits I use are just a bunch of homemade ones. I've just got some guys that have sent me some heads that I make my own up. I make my own components, put my own blades on them, put the big oversized Hildebrandt blades on, and try to create a really big profile spinnerbait because I love spinnerbait fishing. I mean, some of the I probably caught more 7-pound plus bass on a 3/4 ounce spinnerbait than about any lure out there. And this is the time of year to fish it. Now up until that water temperature gets 60 degrees, I'll use that big spinnerbait with that big either number 7 Colorado or number 7 Willow bunch.
I love that.
That SV3 is the real deal now. I'm telling you, it is the fish catching bait.
I like that blade. It's an interesting looking blade. It's a willow, but it's got that kind of turtle looking. It's got that little crease. Is there like kind of a crease to it, or am I just seeing that wrong?
Yeah. It's a different flash it puts out on it, but it's just a combination of everything on that. It's a combination of the wire length and diameter, head design, the skirt, with that natural trailer looks really cool on it that you can't really duplicate anything else. And it's one of the few baits I use stock trailers on. Most of everything else I tie my own, but that's one bait that I will use stock trailer on, stock skirt, I mean.
It's a good looking spinnerbait. Got to make sure you have a lure retriever though. Like that Mega Bass stuff's pricey. It's good stuff, but it's pricey.
Yep.
Wood Butcher says, thanks for all your videos. And he says, will you fish a jerkbait all year long?
Yep, I fish it all year long to some extent. I mean, depending upon where I'm at. I mean, if you're fishing up north, the best time of year to fish a jerkbait is in the summertime up there. And I fish a jerkbait a lot in the summertime around boat docks. It's one of the best lures you can fish on any type of dock, whether it be piling or floating docks. Fish get on them a lot in the summertime. But I'll fish them. I fish most of my jerkbaits from, say, November 1st till May 1st, and then that's probably accounts for 5% of my jerkbait fishing, and then 25% the rest of the year.
What's your thoughts on this? says, why does Bassmaster still keep fish in the live well, or the MLF guys weigh and release? What's your thoughts on that?
I think that's just because the model that Bass has, they still like the weigh-in deal. They like the, it brings crowds in. I mean, that's one of the reasons that the MLF doesn't have any crowds, is because they don't have anything to show them. So by bringing fish to the weigh-in to show off, I mean, that gets the big crowds, and that's what gets the Chamber of Commerce's, paying the money to put them in there. From a conservation standpoint, the MLF format is much better. So, but I don't ever see Bass changing it. I think that's just sort of ingrained in their business model.
So what are you fishing this year as far as tournaments?
Fishing the Bassmaster Southern Opens and the Toy Series Plains Division.
Okay,
those are the two. But I'm so busy with the stuff I'm doing with Fish the Moment right now that it's and that takes up so much of my time. It's even hard to get away with that,
Yeah, I can imagine. It's
that's a full-time job in itself.
It's overwhelming.
Plus overtime.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah.
How did you get involved with Johnny Schultz and Fish the Moment? How'd that come to be?
He used to come when he was like, I met him when he was like 8 years old. His mom and dad used to take him to the tournaments to watch the tournaments. And I met him at the Bassmaster Classic. I can't even remember which classic it was. And we sort of kept in contact over the years. Johnny's dad would call me, several times a year, to try to just get some advice for Johnny if he had a tournament coming up, and just sort of help mentoring Johnny. And I hadn't talked to him for 5 or 6 years or something. And I was at Table Rock a couple of years ago, and he was down there launching his boat when I was down there, and we got talking and got hooked up, and he asked me if I wanted to come help him out with what he's doing at Fish the Moment. And we've been doing it ever since.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
He's a great guy. He really is.
8 years old, and it comes back around full circle.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you come up with all these ideals? You're dropping 7 videos a day. That's insane. A week, yeah. We do a live stream on Monday nights, and then I do 2 videos a week, and that's a lot. I can't imagine doing 7 videos a week and keeping up.
Yeah, I try to get 2. I try to get a day out. I get one in the morning and one in the evening, so it's actually 14 a week on there.
Holy cow!
But yeah.
Wow.
The main thing is just I've been fishing for so long, man. I just got so much stuff in my mind, that you could talk about fishing. I've literally been fishing. Fishing has been the center of my life for, over 50 years. So it's like you can imagine how many thousands of days I've been on the water and, talking to people. And like I said, one of the reasons I do it is like I was one of the most secretive guys out there forever. I didn't share any information because it was so hard to get. But when I started this YouTube channel, I guess it's been 2 years ago now, I thought it would just be a good way the sponsors would like it. And I didn't even know if anyone would watch it. I didn't know anything about technology as far as editing, or I didn't have a camera. I didn't even know how to set a YouTube channel up. I knew nothing about it. So I just started shooting videos with my phone and not really knowing what I wanted to do. And I started just talking about tips and modifications and stuff like that. And people started watching it, and it started growing really quick, surprisingly. And eventually, about a year ago, it got to the point where I was making more money off of YouTube than I could fishing. And it got more and more and more all the time. And I said to myself, it's like, you can't win as much money as you're making from YouTube fishing. So why not just give these secrets away on YouTube? Because it's just, from a business standpoint, it's a smart thing to do. Why hide something if you can make more money sharing it with people? And that's sort of the philosophy I've got right now. So I'm just in the process of just sharing a bunch of stuff I've learned and not holding anything back.
I think it's great, man. I think it's great to get that stuff out of there because, fishermen are pretty tight-lipped, notoriously tight-lipped. Yeah. And if you don't let that stuff out, it just kind of disappears. When we leave this earth, those secrets stay with us and they're not out there. So this is a great way of documenting it. And you got a vlog of all these techniques and secrets, and it's one of the reasons why I started my channel, is just to have history out there. When I'm gone, somebody can my grandkids or whoever can go back and watch me on YouTube. So there'll always be like a living moment of me out there.
Agreed.
Yeah, John's it's pretty fun too.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You said you had a question.
Oh, when fishing a jerkbait, we lost it. Where'd it go? There it is. When fishing a jerkbait, do you use a loop knot, Palomar knot, snap?
No, I don't ever use a loop knot. I always use just an O-ring and just tie directly to the O-ring, usually with a double uni knot or a Palomar knot, one of the two. If I'm in a hurry, I'll use the Palomar knot. If I've got some time, I'll use the double uni. But I never use a loop knot on it.
So back to the YouTube channel, are there videos where you thought that you would get a lot more views and you didn't, and then there's videos that you're like, I don't understand exactly why people are watching this video more than they did another one? Is there still videos that surprise you and the amount of reaction that it gets?
It's sort of like I've sort of got a pretty good gauge on what's going to work or not. And here's the thing about it. It's like, there's so much fishing information on YouTube that there's not been a topic that hasn't been talked about, or a technique or a lure. So it's very difficult to get a lot of views on technique and baits and that type of stuff. I mean, it's extremely difficult to do that. You usually got to have some type of a twist to it. Excuse me, some type of the seasonal application. What I found out about the reality of YouTube is that when I try to teach something that I know is really going to help somebody become a better angler, nobody watches the video. But if I throw something out there like my secret way to rig a wacky rig, it's going to help you catch a few fish, but it's not going to help you like some of the stuff that I put out. It may get a ton of views. So it sort of made me realize that so much of the YouTube viewership, people want to be sort of entertained over educated. I mean, that's just sort of the way that people view media. That is education is boring, it really is. So I'm always trying to search for things that are interesting for people to read. And if I put everything up there that I wanted to, everybody would hate me, because I mean, the things that get the most views are the most controversial topics. So unless I want everybody out there to hate me, I can't put everything out there that I want to. But it's sort of an interesting study on what people think is going to help their fishing or not.
Yeah,
one of the things that how people's fishing more than anything else is the mental part of it. I mean, the mental part of fishing is the most important part, but most people could care less about it. They do not want to hear it. And if I post something on that, nobody watches it. I mean, there'll be a handful of guys, the hardcore dudes will watch it, but not just the average viewer won't. And that's where it lies. If you want to grow in quantum leaps for fishing, that's what you have to do. But most people, they grow at a snail's pace because they won't get into that realm. They just what the best color worm is, or what's the hottest new creature bait or something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's after you fish for a while. I had this conversation the other night with Debo's fishing, and we were talking about everybody's looking for a magic bait or a magic color, but really the thing is finding fish. That's to me that's the toughest thing. The most difficult thing is actually finding fish. It's not so much the baits. I think 75% of fishing is mental, and of that mental side of it, it's fish location. You got to find the fish, or it doesn't matter what you're throwing, what color it is, and what shape it is. If you're not around the fish, you're not going to catch them. And I think a lot of emphasis should be put into that versus all the latest and greatest colors and sizes and shapes.
Yeah. locating fish does not get much attention on YouTube because it requires a commitment to watch and learn a little bit. But I think that's just the reality of it. I don't think there's anything you can really do about that. I mean, that's why, you had show like Keeping Up with the Kardashians got millions and millions of views because it was easy to watch. You didn't have to think. It was entertaining. And I think that's what people want. When they watch YouTube, they don't want to have to work. There's some people want to learn, but they don't want to have to go to school, I guess, by watching a YouTube. They want some type of escape, which I understand. I mean, I'm sort of the same way on what I watch, but when you're an instructor, when you're trying to teach and instruct, it's almost like you want people to get excited about what will help them catch fish. And that just doesn't go across very good on YouTube. It doesn't.
Interesting. Chris says you need more videos.
It's amazing to me to see some of these channels out there that have got gigantic followings, because I've watched a few of them, and it's like there's little to no educational value in it. It's mainly more entertaining than it is educational. So I think that you have to balance it. Do you want a successful YouTube channel, or do you want to be a teacher? And you sort of have to balance the two with that. Because I know some of the videos I put out, I know they're not going to get many views when I put them out, but I put them out because I know they're necessary, and it's really going to help people catch them if they just listen to it.
Yeah. I know what you mean. There's different viewers. I don't want to say different levels by any means, but there's some that are newer to fishing. So, your how to tie a Palomar knot type of videos are going to apply. And then there's some people that are advanced tournament fishermen, and that the how to pattern fish type videos are going to appeal to them. And then there's everything in between. So that's the good thing about having a big catalog. You're doing 14 videos a week. You've got a big catalog where there's something in there for everybody, multiple videos for every different type of fisher person out there.
Yeah, it's fun. It's like it's a creative outlet. That's one of the things I like about the YouTube, is like it gives you a chance to express your own creativity a little bit. And with mine, the reason mine doesn't have any production values because I just don't know how to do it. And a lot of the guys that watch my channel, they comment, I'll just put it on the way to work, and I don't have to watch it. I can just listen to it. So that's sort of my demographic is, if I put a video, if I get my, stepson Owen to go with me and put the GoPro on the boat and do some footage on the water, I can't get anyone to watch it. Nobody wants to watch on the water stuff. They just want to watch me in the tackle room and they're talking about fishing.
Yeah, they want to watch you on the way home from the gym, or on the way.
Yeah, just stuff like that.
Yeah. That's cool, man.
So what do you watch on YouTube?
The fishing wise, not fishing wise.
Dealer's choice.
I mean, the fishing channels that I watch, I like Matt Steffen. I thought Matt Steffen's got a really good channel on there. I also watch Roland Martin. Roland cracks me up. He's like all over the place. He doesn't have any educational value, but he's so just authentic and Roland, if you know him, that I just like checking in with him. And another one, non-fishing, I really get a kick out of that. Have you guys heard of the Liver King?
No.
The guy from anyway, it's this guy. He's he basically all he does is eat raw meat and raw liver and raw testicles, and he's like jacked, unbelievable. And he's got a really positive life message, though. He's like a motivational type speaker, and he holds my attention. He's pretty entertaining. And then I like to watch a lot of camping YouTube videos, guys out camping, bushcraft, and that type of stuff.
Yeah, I'm all over the.
Yeah, you got to check out the liver. You got to check out the Liver King. He's pretty interesting.
I'll
Liver King. I guarantee he would hold your attention. It's really, really interesting.
That's a new one to me.
Derwin has a question here. Old school question for Randy. Do you still swim a grub on a darter head?
No, I don't. I haven't used a grub on a darter head forever. I will use a little piece of a 4-inch worm on a darter head sometimes, I'll bite down a little straight-tailed worm to like 3 inches, and sometimes fish that on a darter head. If I'm fishing around a lot of small spotted bass in clear water, that works pretty good still.
Yeah, I don't think that grub gets used as much just because of since they came out with the paddle tail swim bait. It seems like a lot of people moved over to your 2.8 or your 3.3 size.
Well, the new and shiny, right?
Yeah, the new and shiny, but they still work.
They all still work. I mean, the old plum worm still catching fish around here.
So I got to ask you, in all your adventures out there, have you ever ran across Sasquatch or any Sasquatch sighting, or do you know anybody besides Matt Steffen? I know Matt Steffen has a really good Sasquatch story, but besides him, you know anything about the old Sasquatch?
No, I don't know anything about that at all. I haven't even seen my first black bear yet. I'm out in the woods and out in nature more than anybody I know, and they say there's bears here in Missouri. I have yet to see a bear. I saw a mountain lion on the property I had up north of Joplin one time running across the field, but I've never seen a bear. So no, I've never seen Sasquatch.
Well, you never know. You might see a Sasquatch before you see a black bear.
It's true. You never know. I saw a black bear last fall in Perry County, Missouri, which is about 30 miles south of us. We live in Cape Girardeau County. North, I'm sorry. Perry County is the next county north of us. And I was coming from Illinois across the Mississippi River in Chester, and it was about an hour after sunset. It was kind of raining, and there was a black bear standing on the side of the road. And I called the conservation department a couple days later and reported it. And they said that they've been having an uptick of black bear sightings in Perry County.
That's awesome. I would love to see one. I'm just so fascinated just to watch them. I just like to sit there and watch them forever if I could see one.
We got a winner yet?
We do. That was quick.
It was very quick.
That's why the second or the third quickest. So. Kirk Short.
Congratulations, Kirk.
Congratulations.
Shoot me a message at Gabe Montgomery Fishing or 10 Horse Monty on Facebook, and then also on Instagram, 10 Horse Monty 6. Just send me your shipping information, and I'll get a package out for you this week. I'm kind of behind on the giveaway stuff, so guys that are waiting, I'm going to get all this stuff together and get it in the mail, like probably Wednesday.
You are a mailman, right?
I'm a mailman, but I've just been slacking. I've been trying to fish a bunch. The days have been like in the 70s, and I've been abandoning all my responsibilities lately, and I'm gonna have to buckle down and be mature for a couple of days.
South Jersey's got a question here, Randy. Do you still believe in the original Chatterbait is just as good as the jackhammer, and why?
I believe it's better than the jackhammer, and that's not because I have any prejudice to jackhammer, because I think the jackhammer is a better made bait. It's got a better hook in it. It's got a keeper. The components are better on it. By all indications, it's a better bait. And I fished it a lot, but I just catch more bass on the original Chatterbait. It's like I've experimented with it back and forth. And normally, if I'm on a Chatterbait bite, I'd have one of each. I'd have a jackhammer, a Chatterbait, and time again, I just caught more and bigger fish on the Chatterbait. It's got to have something to do with the vibration, because it doesn't have anything to do with the component. So it's a vibration deal. It's sort of like the old Bandit crankbait. The 200 Bandit is a cheap bait. It's a poor quality control, but it's a fish catching bait for whatever reason. And I just more fish on it, so that's why I fish it more.
What trailer do you typically run on a bladed jig?
It totally depends on the situation. I like that Lake Fork Magic Shad. I like a Z-Craw Junior on it sometimes. Sometimes I like a Speed Craw on it. And sometimes I like just like some type of a swim bait, it's like a smaller paddle tail swim bait. So it just depends on what the fish are feeding on. If I think they're on big gizzard shad or crawdads or whatever.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. That's basically the three options that I have. Some sort of a little small 3-inch swim bait or something like a fluke, some like a big fluke can work, and then like a Z crawl, or sometimes I'll put a rage crawl in there. It gets really, really crazy.
Yeah.
Have you experimented with that big blade at all yet?
I have not tried it. No, I haven't.
I threw it the other day, and it hunts like a freaking square bill.
Really?
If you get to jacking it, rolling it pretty good, it probably moves 8 to 10 inches back and forth, left and right. Which is
that
really
a chatterbait or jackhammer?
It's a chatterbait. It's I guess it's the Brian Thrift design big blade.
It's got the real big blade on it. Did you have a outside weight?
3/4?
3/4? Okay.
So you can really slow it down, and it just dum, 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 which is really nice.
Probably a good bait. It sounds good.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's. I haven't caught anything on it yet, but I haven't given it much time yet. So.
Yeah.
Well, let's see here. We'll ask you a couple more questions and we'll let you go. It's been really cool hanging out with you. I know you're a busy guy, so I appreciate you spending some time with us. I wanted to ask you, there's BFL is coming up down there the 1st of April. There's going to be back-to-back. They canceled the first one at Lake of the Ozarks in the Ozark division because of, inclement weather. So they've stacked them. They got a Saturday BFL at Table Rock, and they got a Sunday BFL. Any guesses on what you think is going to be going on down there? Like, something to focus on, to look at if you were going to go down there and do some pre-practice. And maybe there's some people on here that are going to be fishing that.
Can you fish an A-rig in the tournament?
Yeah. Can
you fish that time of year? You can't win really unless you're fishing an A-rig, even that late in the year. I mean, somebody's going to catch them on it. Not you. There'll be a lot of people throw it and not catch them on it, but somebody's probably going to throw it and win the tournament on it. A wild card in that tournament would be if you have the weather on there. If you've got a nasty day, it might get one on a big spinnerbait. Possibly slow rolling a big spinnerbait could possibly work. If it's super tough and there's no wind and it's bright and it's just super tough conditions where they don't get on an A-rig very good, wiggle ward's probably going to be tough to beat at that time. And also there's going to definitely be a window for a big swim bait or a glide bait. We play if that water temperature is in the upper 50s. Probably a little too early for spawning. I don't think the fish will be bedding very heavy then, but a lot of it just depends on the weather patterns we get leading up into that. Because I've seen it snow a bunch here in April before, first part of April. So that depends on it, but that'd be my guess on it. A-rig, wiggle wort, big swim bait, big spinnerbait.
Yeah, you think the jerkbait bite could still be a player or not?
You can catch them on it, but you're not going to win the tournament on it. It's not going to produce the size of fish for it. I mean, it just won't. I mean, the fish just aren't really positioned to be caught on that. And it's also at Table Rock, it's hard to win on a jerkbait anymore if you can use an A-rig. If the A-rigs aren't legal in the tournament, you can win on a jerkbait, but a jerkbait cannot compete with an A-rig, for the quality fish on that. And the A-rig, like I said, it's super hit and miss. Like I said, if you got a 100-boat tournament and in this time of year, there may be 1 or 2 boats catching them on an A-rig good, and everybody else is throwing it and not catching nothing on it. It's very, very finicky bite on there. But at Table Rock, you've got so many options. Like I said, depending on what part of the lake you are, but it's all about per fish. I mean, you can catch a mid to upper teens bag on a wiggle wart on a good day if the conditions are right. But again, it's hard to win on there. So it's hard to say until you see the exact type of day that you're going to have. If you've got a windy day, it's just you're going to catch some big ones on a big spinnerbait if it's right too. So
it's a shot in the dark. It's still pretty far off. I remember we fished it last year, and the spots had already kind of spawned, and no, the smallmouth I can't remember. The smallmouth come up earlier, right? Or is it the spots that come up earlier on Table Rock?
Smallmouth will come up first, but
so the smallmouth were kind of at the end of their spawn of that first cycle, and the spots were moving up. This was April, I think, last year. So we were dragging we were just pitching drop shots, actually just casting drop shots and dragging them. It was a fun bite. but they were already up there. I think the water temperatures were like mid 50s, if I remember right. I need to go back and watch that video and see exactly what I was doing. But that was
another
fun.
reason why
there's a lot of ways.
Yep.
I mean, there's 20 ways you can catch a limit there, but there's only a couple ways you can win in the tournament. That's the big difference on these tournaments. If you want to make a check or win.
That was like a 12, 13 pound bag doing the, dragging the drop shot. And I think it took 18 pounds to win.
Yeah.
So obviously, old school question here. What's your favorite old school bait you still use, either hard or soft?
Old school bait that I still use?
Yep.
Probably the number one old school bait I still use would be occasionally an old balsa square bill crankbait, just an old custom made, like a B3 square bill. Certain situations, if I'm fishing around shallow wood and hot water, dirty water, there's something about that hand carved square bill that just outproduces plastic under those situations. That's the main thing. And I also use, I'm back to using pork now that, I found there's several companies making pork now. I'm back to using the jig with the pork frog on it. Old school there.
Are you a fan of the pork frog?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Right. It's not in all situations, but when you get the right set of circumstances, pork will outproduce plastic by far for the good fish. Not all the time, but when the situation's right.
I just kind of started. I used to fish pork. We'll go on a little pork rant real quick.
We'll sit back on the pork rant.
No, I used to fish pork when I was really young, and I totally forgot about it because you got all these new things that come out, and then they started making it again. So I bought some pork because I've been in a boat with a buddy of mine over here in Southern Illinois, and he was catching them on tough days with pork. That's his go-to. And this is cold water. We're talking over the winter. We're talking water temperatures. Mid 30s up to like low 40s. And so I bought some pork, and I'm a believer in it. I mean, I think when that water's like 42 and below, I think it can make a big difference. Do you strictly fish it in cold water, or do you fish it all year long? Or what are your...
No, my favorite time to fish it is in the middle of the summer.
I knew you were going to say that. You were going to go completely opposite of the winter time.
Yeah. Dirty water, heavy cover, lay downs, flooded cover, docks, in the dirty water. That's when I like to fish it. Heavy 30-pound line, flipping stick, all that deal.
You got to keep that sucker wet though. What do you use to keep it from drying out?
I just hang it over the side of the boat, when I'm not fishing with it, and put it usually, if I'm running a long distance, I just put it in the live well or something.
Okay, that's a good idea. That's a real good
idea right there.
Smart. You got it. You might as well use it. Favorite wiggle wart color?
Man, to be honest with you, I do not have a favorite wiggle wart color. I use a ton of different colors just based upon the water clarity and conditions. If I had to say that I have one that I use more than anything else, it's a shad pattern. Simply because a lot of people don't use the shad pattern, and it gets bites and gets good fish to bite it. But I stay away from the ones I don't use are the brown phantoms and the green phantoms, because every freaking buddy uses the brown phantom and the green phantom. So I don't even know if I got one in my box. I stay away from those a lot.
Bull Shoals, first week of April. What part of the lake are you focusing on?
Well, to me, there's only one part to fish on Bull Shoals, and that's basically from Lead Hill up. So I'm always fishing from Lead Hill up. I like the upper end of that lake. I think it fishes easier. I think that there's more fish, and I think there's bigger fish up there, a lot more diversity. So I'd definitely be above Lead Hill that time of year. Anytime, but that time too also.
Josh, no, I haven't been throwing a frog yet, but it's close. I think we're just a little 4 or 5 warming trend, 4 or 5 days of warm weather. I think it's definitely a possibility. I mean, I wouldn't be scared to throw it right now. You never know. Those fish get up there, that water gets like 51, 52. They'll be up there looking around. If they're up there and you put it on their head and you kind of let it sit, they'll suck it in. Couple more questions here. B. Saunders says, Randy, is the rain going to change Grand Lake for red crest? What's your thoughts on that?
It's going to make him bite really good, or not really good, but it's going to make him bite better than if he didn't have rain. Like I said, Grand's not near the lake it used to be. It's just gotten so much hammered and so much pressure. But I can promise you, there'll be some guys. All the big bags will get caught on big spinnerbait there. If it's raining, for sure. There'll be. That's how it's going to get one more than likely.
Yeah, Joey says it's amazing the difference in opinions in the pros. It is. Everybody's got a different angle and confidence. They've gained confidence through different sets of experiences.
I was just going to say that confidence is the biggest thing. I mean, you take a guy like Denny or Jason Christie or Randy or whoever, you name a pro, and there's 4 or 5 baits that they have the most confidence in, and they can go out and kick all of our butts day in and day out with that set of baits.
And they'll approach the same situation from a
3 different
way
ways
with different baits
and still have the same results when
Yeah.
they come out of there.
Yep.
So,
because like you said earlier, there's multiple patterns going on at any time on a body of water.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
South Jersey, you can ask 10 different fishermen questions, and you're all going to get 10 different answers. And what he forgot to include in that was all 10 of them are going to be lies. So
they're just stretches of the imagination. They're stretching them a little bit.
Stretching the truth.
When would you start throwing a buzzbait? Do you have a certain water temperature when you start looking at a buzzbait, Randy?
Yeah, normally when that water temperature starts getting in the mid 50s, I'm thinking about throwing it if it's the right situation. I mean, if you got mid 50 water and you got warming trend, rising barometric pressure, south wind, prefrontal, warming trend specifically, they get on a buzzbait good when you have abnormally warm weather for a couple of days and the water's a little bit off colored stain.
Good deal. All right. It's almost been 2 hours. It's been good to hang out with you, man. I really appreciate it. Any closing thoughts or anything you wanted to?
If they're not already following you, where can they go and follow you at?
Yeah, you can just follow me on my YouTube channels, Intuitive Angling with Randy Blaukat. You guys can check out the videos that they're appreciated. And yeah, just thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah. Thanks for taking some time out of your evening. I mean, we know you got young child and wife, and it's all a challenge to balance.
So yeah, good luck out there too on the trail. We'll be paying attention to you.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.
All right, man. We're done. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us, and people that are new, we do this every Monday, so we'd like to see you back here next Monday if you got the time. We're out of here. See ya.